He grabbed my wrist and twisted hard enough that white pain shot up my arm. I remember the sound I made, half gasp, half scream, and the way my knees buckled. I looked to my mother for help. She stood there, watching, and said, calm and cold, "You brought this on yourself. If that moment already makes your chest tighten, stay with me." What happened next didn't start in that kitchen. It started long before. And it ends somewhere you might not expect. Before I tell you the rest, let me ask you something. Where are you listening from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments as you listen. It matters more than you think. My name is Hannah Cole. I live alone in a cramped studio apartment in Lubbock, Texas. The kind of place where the hum of the AC never quite stops and the walls feel thinner at night. I work remote customer support for an outsourced tech services company. 10-hour shifts, back-to-back calls, different names on the screen, different problems in my headset, all blurring together until I clock out and realize I've barely moved all day. Rent is always due too soon. Sleep never feels like rest. And even though I left my mother's house years ago to escape what I couldn't name back then, I was never really free. Not from the guilt, not from the quiet pressure to keep the peace, not from the invisible pull of a family that only noticed me when they needed something. My mother, Margaret Cole, hates being alone more than anything. After my dad died, she drifted from man to man, each one louder, angrier, more demanding than the last. When she married Victor Hale, she told everyone he was a contractor with big plans. He wore confidence like a uniform, talked about projects that were always about to pay off, promised stability he never delivered. Victor hadn't held a legitimate job in years. What he did have was paperwork, forms, applications, numbers that looked official if you didn't stare too long. The night everything cracked open, I stopped by my mother's house after work. I was exhausted. My head was pounding from hours of forced politeness. I just wanted to drop off some mail and leave. But Victor was waiting at the kitchen table with a stack of documents laid out neatly, like he'd been rehearsing. "Sit down," he said, smiling. "I just need one small favor." The papers were loan documents, tens of thousands of dollars. And my name was already there. My full legal name, my address, my social security number, typed in, clean, ready. All that was missing was my signature. I told him no. At first, he laughed like I was joking. Then he reached for me. His hand closed around my wrist, tight and deliberate. I felt the pressure before the pain, like a warning. "Don't make this difficult," he said, lowering his voice. I pulled back. He tightened his grip and twisted. The pain was instant and blinding. It felt like my arm didn't belong to me anymore. I cried out and looked at my mother, standing by the sink, hands still wet from the dishes. She didn't rush over. She didn't shout. She didn't even look surprised. She looked at me and said, "You brought this on yourself." That sentence hurt more than his grip. Victor let go, like he'd proven his point. My wrist throbbed, already swelling. He slid the papers closer, calm again, like nothing had happened. "Family helps family," he said. "Think about it." I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I picked up my bag with my good hand and walked out into the cold night air, shaking so badly I could barely get my keys into the lock of my car. By the time I got home, the bruise had started to bloom. Dark, ugly, undeniable. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at it, replaying my mother's words over and over. Not because I believed them, but because I realized something terrifying. She meant them. That was the moment I understood this wasn't just about a loan, or money, or Victor. This was about how far my own mother was willing to go to protect the illusion of a family, even if it meant sacrificing me. I didn't sleep that night, and by morning, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. This wasn't over. 4 days passed in a blur of painkillers, missed calls, and the dull throb in my wrist that refused to let me forget what had happened. I tried to work through it, tried to keep my voice steady on customer calls, but every time I reached for my mouse or typed too fast, a sharp reminder shot up my arm. Sleep came in fragments. When it did, it carried the smell of my mother's kitchen and the sound of her voice saying those words like a verdict. On the 4th morning, my phone buzzed with a name I hadn't seen in years. Ethan. My brother had left long before I did. He was the first one who figured out that survival sometimes meant walking away without permission. We hadn't fought. We hadn't even said goodbye properly. He just disappeared one day, and I'd heard through relatives that he was doing fine somewhere across town. I stared at the screen longer than I should have before answering. "Are you okay?" he wrote. I typed back a lie, erased it, then sent the truth. "No." He showed up less than an hour later. 3 quick knocks, a pause, then 2 more. The signal we used as kids when we needed to know it was safe to open the door. When I saw him standing there, something in my chest loosened and tightened at the same time. He looked older, harder around the eyes, but unmistakably my brother. "Jesus, Hannah," he said softly as he stepped inside. "This place is small." "I know," I replied, suddenly aware of every chipped mug and thrift store chair. He didn't comment again. He noticed my wrist instead. "Let me see." "I'm fine," I said automatically. "Don't lie to me." I held my arm out. The bruise had spread into a dark, angry shape, purple and green, wrapping around my wrist like fingerprints that wouldn't let go. His jaw clenched. I watched a familiar anger rise, the kind he used to swallow for my sake when we were younger. "When?" "4 days ago." He didn't shout. That was worse. He inhaled slowly, then said, "We're going to the hospital." At the emergency room, the air smelled like disinfectant and exhaustion. The nurse didn't ask if I'd fallen. She asked how it happened. When I told her, she nodded once and typed without hesitation. The x-rays showed no fracture, but the doctor explained the damage carefully, documenting everything. Each photograph, each note, felt like another line drawn in ink instead of memory. On the way out, Ethan stopped walking and turned to me. "We need to check your credit." I laughed, short and hollow. "Why?" "Because guys like Victor don't stop at bruises." We sat in his car, the heater humming, as he pulled up the report on his phone. His expression shifted so fast, it made my stomach drop. Concern turned to disbelief, then to something colder. "Hannah," he said slowly, "when did you apply for a car loan?" "I didn't." "There's a denied application from 6 weeks ago. $25,000. He scrolled. "And a mortgage inquiry. And, this is the bad part, you're listed as an officer in multiple companies." I felt like the ground tilted. "What companies?" He turned the screen toward me. Names I had never heard before, titles I had never accepted. My name sat there in black text, clean and official, attached to things that suddenly felt radioactive. "This isn't a mistake," he said. "This is identity theft." The word hung between us, heavy and undeniable. My mind raced backward, replaying moments that now made 6 sense. Victor asking casual questions about my job, my mother wanting to help with paperwork, comments about how responsible I was, how good my credit must be. "He's been using me," I whispered, "for months." "And Mom knew," Ethan said quietly. I wanted to argue. I wanted to protect whatever image of her I had left. But the evidence sat there, undeniable, and the memory of her voice in that kitchen cut through every excuse I could form. This wasn't desperation, it was planning. I pressed my good hand against my forehead as nausea rose. "He's ruining my future." Ethan reached over and gripped my shoulder, careful not to touch my wrist. "No," he said firmly. "He tried. But now you know. And knowing changes everything." I looked at the screen one more time, at my name stitched into crimes I didn't commit, and something inside me hardened. The fear was still there, sharp and loud, but beneath it was something new. Clarity. Victor hadn't just crossed a line. He'd been erasing me piece by piece, confident I would stay silent. And my mother, by choice or by fear, had let him. That was the moment I stopped wondering how bad things could get, and started asking myself a different question. How far was I willing to go to make it stop? Ethan didn't give me time to second-guess myself. The morning after we pulled my credit report, he called a number he'd saved years ago and put the phone on speaker. That was how I first heard Detective Laura Bennett's voice, calm, measured, and steady in a way that made me feel like the room had finally stopped spinning. She met us that afternoon at a small interview office inside the Lubbock Police Department. No flickering lights, no raised voices, just a desk, 2 chairs, and the quiet hum of an old air conditioner. She listened without interrupting while I explained what had happened, asking questions only when she needed clarity, never once looking surprised. That alone told me this wasn't new territory for her. When I finished, she folded her hands and said, "What you're describing is domestic violence, combined with financial coercion and identity theft." Those cases tend to overlap more than people realize. The words landed heavier than I expected. Domestic violence, identity theft. Hearing them spoken out loud made everything feel real in a way memory never had. Laura helped me file for an emergency protective order that same day. When she slid the paperwork across the table, my name printed neatly at the top, my hand shook as I signed. The order meant Victor couldn't come near me. It also meant there was now a line he could cross, one that came with consequences. As we stood to leave, Laura stopped me. "This is just the beginning," she said. "If you're willing, we can dig deeper." I didn't hesitate. I nodded. Over the next few days, I lived between my apartment and public records offices, scrolling through databases I never imagined I'd need to understand. Business registrations, LLC filings, court records. With each search, my stomach tightened. My name kept appearing where it didn't belong. Secretary, financial officer, co-owner, companies with polished titles that dissolved just months after being formed, leaving unpaid debts behind like wreckage. One afternoon, as I stared at another screen full of lies attached to my identity, I realized something worse than the fraud itself. This wasn't sloppy, it was deliberate. Victor hadn't panicked and grabbed whatever he could. He had planned this. He had built a structure around my name, counting on my silence to hold it up. The deeper I went, the clearer another pattern became. Transfers, cash, dates that lined up with my paydays, and the same name kept appearing on transaction logs. My mother's. I sat back in the chair, the plastic creaking beneath me, and felt a hollow open in my chest. Margaret hadn't just stood by while Victor hurt me. She had been moving the money, walking into financial service counters, sending transfers just under reporting limits, doing it often enough to know exactly how the system worked. When I told Laura what I'd found, she closed her eyes briefly, then nodded. "That confirms what I suspected." I asked her if that meant my mother would be charged. Laura didn't answer right away. "It means she's involved," she said carefully. "How that plays out depends on what happens next." By then, Victor was running out of options. Laura explained it to me without drama, laying the facts out like pieces on a table. His credit was burned. His usual lenders had stopped answering his calls. The shell companies were collapsing. "Desperation changes people," she said, "and desperate people make mistakes." That's when she proposed the plan. "We believe he's going to come back to you," Laura said. "Not with apologies, with pressure. If you're willing, we can control the situation." The idea was simple and terrifying. I would let it slip, carefully, that I was about to receive money. An inheritance. Nothing extravagant, but enough to solve his immediate problems. The bait wasn't the money itself. It was the timing. Laura made it clear I had a choice. "You don't owe us anything," she said. "This only works if you feel safe enough to do it." Safe wasn't the word I would have used. But as I thought about the records, the fake companies, the debts waiting to explode under my name, something hardened inside me. If I backed away now, Victor wouldn't stop. He'd just adjust, find someone else, or come back to me in a different way. "I'll do it," I said quietly. The preparation took days. Laura explained the legal boundaries, what counted as coercion, how to protect myself, where officers would be positioned. Every detail mattered. There would be cameras, witnesses, documentation, nothing left to chance. At night, alone in my apartment, fear crept in anyway. I imagined Victor's voice, my mother's disappointment, the way silence had always been used as a weapon in my family. But beneath the fear was something stronger. For the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was choosing. And that choice, even before anything happened, already felt like a kind of freedom. The grocery store was louder than I expected. Carts rattled across tile. A child cried somewhere near the checkout lanes. The fluorescent lights flattened everything into the same pale brightness, as if nothing terrible could possibly happen in a place this ordinary. I told myself to breathe as I walked toward the money services counter, my palms slick, my heartbeat too fast to hide. Victor and my mother were already there. He stood too close, his shoulder angled in a way that blocked the counter from view, as if proximity alone could bend the outcome. Margaret hovered on my other side, lips pressed thin, eyes scanning the room with a practiced alertness of someone who knew how to look calm while waiting for control to return to her hands. "You're late," Victor said, his voice low but sharp. "We don't have all day." I nodded, keeping my gaze on the counter. The plan was simple. Let him talk. Let him push. Let the space do what it was meant to do. We need to move fast, he continued, sliding a folded paper toward me. Wire it, today. I didn't unfold it. I told you I'm still waiting for confirmation. He smiled without warmth. That's not how this works. You have it. You use it. Margaret leaned in, close enough that I could smell her perfume. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, she said softly. If you don't help us, I can't keep co-signing your lease. You know that. The words landed with a familiar weight. The old threat, dressed up as concern. I felt the urge to shrink, to apologize for needing anything at all, but I stayed still. The teller looked up from her screen, professional and polite. How can I help you today? Victor answered before I could. She's sending a wire. The teller's eyes shifted to me. Ma'am, is that correct? I opened my mouth, then closed it again, buying myself a second. Victor exhaled loudly beside me. She knows what she's doing, he said. Family matter. The teller didn't move. I need to hear it from her. I nodded once. Yes, I said carefully. A wire transfer. As the teller typed, Victor started again, his voice tightening. 45,000, same as we discussed. Margaret's hand brushed my elbow. Just do it, she whispered. This fixes everything. The teller paused and looked up at me, not unkindly. Before we continue, she said, I have to ask, are you being pressured to send this money? The store seemed to quiet around us, as if the question had pulled the air out of the space. Victor shifted. His fingers closed around my wrist, not hard enough to hurt, just enough to remind me that he could. That touch crossed the line. I felt it immediately, not as fear this time, but as clarity. The paper I had signed, the order in my bag, the boundary he had just stepped over without thinking. I pulled my arm back and met the teller's eyes. No, I said. The word came out steady, louder than I expected. I'm not sending anything, Victor laughed sharply. Don't be ridiculous. I said no, I repeated, turning toward him, and you need to step away from me. Margaret stared at me as if I'd spoken in another language. Hannah, she said, warning thick in her voice. Stop! The teller's posture changed. Her hand hovered over a button beneath the counter. Sir, she said to Victor, you need to step back. He didn't. He leaned closer instead, his face hardening. You're embarrassing yourself, he hissed. That was when the officers appeared, moving quickly but without urgency, as if they'd been part of the store all along. One of them spoke my name, gentle and certain. Another addressed Victor, firm and final. Sir, please put your hands where I can see them. Victor froze, disbelief flickering across his face. This is a misunderstanding, he said, already backing away too late. They cuffed him there, between a display of prepaid phones and the money counter he thought would save him. Margaret's mouth opened, then closed again. She didn't reach for me. She didn't say my name. As they led Victor away, I stood still, my wrist tingling where his fingers had been, my chest tight but unbroken. The teller slid a form toward me and spoke quietly. You did the right thing, she said. I believed her. For the first time, the word no felt like something I owned. The investigation didn't end with Victor's arrest. It widened, quietly at first. Then, all at once. Names surfaced, files were pulled. People I had never met stepped forward with stories that sounded painfully familiar. Promises made, papers signed, money gone. Each new statement felt like a confirmation of what I had already learned. Victor's pattern had existed long before me, and it would have continued if no one had stopped it. When the trial finally began, the courtroom felt smaller than I expected. Wood benches, low murmurs, the steady rhythm of procedure that made everything feel both heavy and strangely ordinary. I sat at the witness table and kept my hands folded, aware of how much effort it took not to look toward Victor. He looked thinner, less certain. The confidence he once wore so easily had been replaced by something brittle, but the entitlement was still there, hiding behind his eyes. Then my mother walked in. Margaret took a seat a few rows behind him. She didn't look at me, not once. I watched her straighten her coat, smooth her hair, prepare herself for what she thought would be survival. In that moment, I understood something clearly and without anger. She was still choosing herself. When I testified, my voice surprised me. It didn't shake. I spoke about the documents, the bruises, the way my name had been used as if it belonged to someone else. I spoke about fear without dramatizing it, about control without exaggeration. I told the truth and let it stand on its own. Victor's attorney tried to suggest confusion, misunderstanding, family conflict. The evidence did not bend. The record spoke. The witnesses corroborated one another. Lies collapse when they are forced into the light. Margaret was called to testify late in the proceedings. She admitted what she had done. She acknowledged the transfers, the errands, the times she had looked the other way. When asked why, she said quietly, "I was afraid of being alone." Hori. No apology followed. No glance in my direction. Just that sentence, offered as explanation instead of remorse. That was the moment that hurt the most, not because it surprised me, but because it ended any remaining doubt. She had known, she had chosen, and she would have done it again. The verdict came on a gray afternoon. Victor was sentenced to federal prison on multiple counts, the judge's voice steady and unsentimental as he listed the years. Margaret received a lighter sentence, shaped by cooperation and circumstance, but the damage between us was not something any court could repair. When it was over, I walked out of the courthouse alone. Ethan was waiting across the street, hands in his pockets, offering a small nod that said everything we didn't need to say out loud. We hugged once, tight and brief, then went our separate ways, both of us knowing that distance didn't mean disconnection anymore. I cut contact with my mother shortly after, not out of spite, out of necessity. Healing requires boundaries that cannot be negotiated. Months later, my life looks quieter. I work in fraud prevention now, reviewing cases that echo my own in ways that are sometimes unsettling and often grounding. I know the signs, I know the language. And when I help stop something before it destroys someone else's future, it feels like reclaiming pieces of myself I didn't realize were missing. Some nights, I stand by the window of my apartment and look out at the supermarket parking lot across the street. The lights reflect off the pavement, steady and unremarkable. The fear that once lived in my chest no longer controls my breathing. In its place is something steadier. I learned that family is not defined by who demands your silence. It is defined by who respects your voice. Choosing to protect yourself is not betrayal. It is the first honest act of freedom. Thank you for listening to my story. If you stayed with me from beginning to end, please tell me where you're listening from. And if stories like this matter to you, like and subscribe so you can hear more.